but that like that concept of like the liminal space, I think that's the dark matter, right? Like being tossed in the water like that, the unknowing.
Right.
And being okay with that. That's something that I think a lot of Asians are not okay with. And maybe that's that conversation of Asian American futurism is that concept of that liminal space, of that vortex, of that Alice in Wonderland tunnel, right? And I think, just to answer that, like now that, I'm thought exercising a little bit here, you said, why was that URL available? Well, because when we talk about futurism is a liminal space. Dark matter is a liminal space, right? And to be okay with that space, to be okay with that unknowing, as you were saying, yes, is a form of love, right? Because that knowing, loving the unknown, loving the empty, that's hard. How do you love something that you can't perceive? How do you become okay with something that you can't perceive?
I think it's also, though, what's like really, I mean, I've talked a lot about this to other creatives who are of the same vibe, but just there's not a lot of people that like it makes them it makes them feel good when you're sort of talking about this type of stuff. I think like creatively, like I get the sense that it's people who are sort of just like not afraid to do that. Like I feel like sometimes it brings a lot of fear, the lack of control. Like when you present them with the end product, the reaction that you can get, or even just encouraging people to kind of like let go, I think can be really difficult for most people. So it's really nice to talk about it.
I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I feel like when you emailed me, I was like, I gotta look this up.
And did you?
I did.
Okay. What'd you find?
So I think the definition is roughly what I've been thinking about. Is the one big thing is like where do we stand in society, and like the narratives we want to tell.
I think when people immigrate to a place, like they carry, say like my parents, like they came in the 90s, they carry 90s Korea with them. Meanwhile, Korea has evolved.
Right, absolutely.
And so maybe the immigrants that carry the 80s or 90s whenever they came, they're more authentic, or they're stuck in the past. Like that's what they remember of their home country, Whereas the natives like in the native land, they have like moved on and come up with new types of food or whatever, new types of things. And one small example is my dad still calls, like when like English words, when you say it in Korean, you just kind of make it short, and like butter is butter, right?
Oh, okay.
Except I think a long time ago when English wasn't as common, they pronounce it, I can't even say it, fata or something, and my dad still calls it that, and he's like,
with an F?
No, it's like, just, he says it weirdly, like in a way where it's like very old Korean.
Okay.
And I think if he had stayed in Korea, he would have picked up on butter, maybe,
Sure,
or maybe not, because he never eats butter. And it's not a part of like cooking that much. But I think, yeah, and I remember reading something about Soviet Koreans, like how they have all these like very old customs that Koreans in Korea don't have, because they've been in Korea where things have evolved.
Right.
Sorry, maybe this is sort of a tangent, but just made me think of that. Also, I had a thought on Asian Americans, like why not all of the Americas? I'm thinking, not that I know much about Canada, but just, yeah, I could see that like being very easily like, okay, they're a part of like the same Asian American group. But I would say like if I'm thinking about Brazil, like Asian Americans in Brazil, specifically like Korean Brazilians, I think their experience is so different from ours as me, like as a Korean American, being in a different part of America where racism is very explicit and severe in different ways. That I think we would be coming from slightly different places.
Hollywood has racialized Asian music and Asian expressions and bodily, expressions for a long time. And, even the World Expo has done that. Like, there are these like tents that express like Asian expressions, right? So in 19th century. So I think, so I came in, I was like, oh my god, there's no Asian American genre. Like, I want an Asian American sound. What is that sound? What is that musical sound? What could it consist of? And so finished grad school, like, you know, I wrote a dissertation kind of like exploring what musicians of Asian descent in indie rock was doing. And I went deep into that. Like, I wrote, you know, and interviewed a ton of like indie rock musicians of Asian descent. And then for the most part, they were like, why are you talking to me? Because nothing I do is Asian. Right. That there was a sort of disidentification. And you certainly can't hear it in my sound. I mean, I think there's a intentional, if not a fraught relationship to anything that is a sonic signifier of Asia.
That's something about futurity too, is like a radical kind of like interdependence. You know, when I talk about like collectivity too being so intertwined with like a sort of like futurity, and it's outside of like, you know, yeah, just the individual, the one, the kind of like this, yeah. And I think that like, yeah, failure is a part of futurity for sure. I mean, we kind of like talked about like brushed against failure in terms of like, you know, in terms of like a whole scale like reconsideration of like, you know, systems of valuing, like what does it mean to like fail in a system that like, you know, capitalist system that wasn't made for us to thrive in, you know, that was supposed to like privilege like the few or the individual over like the collective, you know. And yeah, and so there needs to be that like embrace of failure.
In my mind, I was like, you know, I'm just a kid growing up in Wisconsin. It wasn't until a little older I was like, are we that much different? I mean, there are definitely things my friends would appreciate coming over, like having a bowl of pho. You know, they can't get that at home. So, you know, my mom's cooking, you wouldn't find anywhere outside of our home, you know. Yeah, I think there are certain values that I appreciate within, I don't know if it's Vietnamese or Asian culture, that I think might be a little different than standard like American culture. I don't know. But I think at the end of the day, everyone cares about family. But I think within our family, we're very close. I still talk to my brother and sister, both older than me. But I don't know. Just I didn't think psychologically it was that much different.
What does it mean to exist in the future? Safety has to be a huge part of that conversation.
Right.
People have to feel safe enough to reimagine something different.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. And even, you know, like even just to think about the projects that you showed me, right, when we came into this home, I'm still like digesting, right? Like the Viet Cong staff artist. Are you effing kidding me right now?
Well,
I'm not diasporic, you know, like I was born in the States and raised here. Like I've always like considered the reverse. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of like my immediate thought. How using culture and technology to like sort of blast our way out of the present hasn't been a strong thinking suit for me. They're not all, I mean, like, yeah, India was colonized and a lot of Southeast Asia was colonized, but Thailand wasn't, China wasn't, Japan wasn't, you know, unless you think about this sort of Japanese doing their damage different places. Absolutely. And Chinese doing their damage, and, you know, right.
Or if you look at communism as opposed to democracy, right, you know, or socialism versus capitalism. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and how socialism has worked its way in the two largest countries here, India and China. It's absolutely affected what's happening today. Like there's two ways. Like there's like Asian anarchy, which I think is like really strong for places like South Asia. It's anarchic, you know. And then you have the other side of it, which is Singapore. Hold on.
Sort of a monarch of sorts, or
In a meeting.
oh,
So yeah, it's like I'm trying to think through like what role does anarchy play in any
can you
idea of it.
can you talk more about the anarchy?
Yeah. There are rules, but they're meant to be, you know, broken and changed and bribed your way through and all of these other things that and you're constantly somehow learning to make do with the resources you have. There's a sense of ingenuity in how people make do.
Can you give me an example?
Even something like fixing plumbing, you know.
Mhm.
You might just grab things that are lying around the house, like in a rag, just to like make do.
Mhm.
The idea that you can actually use, you know, proper tools and proper tape and, you know, like actually get it done properly may not be the solution or the route people choose because finances, but B, you're just like trying to get on and there's like so much that's falling apart constantly. Like you're just like sticking a thumb in the dike, you know,
Right.
and moving on.
I think one of the contentions I had when I started to learn more about like the art scene in LA was its lack of representation of Asian American artists, but actually a lot of Asian artists were being shown, and maybe having more like gallery representation or commercial success. So definitely didn't want to step on anyone's toes, but also from my experience, I also feel like people assume that I'm a permanent resident, for instance. I have been in America for 10 years, but I've only jumped from like student visa to another, and now this is my second artist visa. And they're all non-immigrant visas. Not to go too much into the technicality, but I feel like the reason why I'm here is so different, I guess, from let's say second generation Asian Americans. So I just wanted to establish that difference, and if it was something that could be, that could still be of interest to the project. Yeah.
Which, of course, I said yes.
Yes. Right.
I mean, my thesis is not just to, I use the word thesis, but you know, my hope is to broaden the term Asian American, kind of twofold. One is to say any person of the quote Asian diaspora who is influenced, has worked, has lived, or has contributed or gained from being on this continent should be Asian American. You know.
Right.
Now today, this idea of immigration and being on land is I think, or at least soon to be superseded by the internet and whatnot. And so there's that. The other part of it is, I think Asian Americans should be broadened to from Antarctica to Patagonia. I don't think it should be solely a United States of America thing.
Right.
I think it should be the entire continent.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my goal,
Yeah,
is to do those two things,
that's beautiful.
which
Oh my god. No, I wanted to say that that's how I approach my work too, in a way, you know, where I'm kind of like chiseling at these like chunks of history and the foundations of what we come to maybe understand as borders and nations, and these like grand concepts of statehood, I guess, and identity, and how we can play with these things, whether it's like official documents or architecture or places, and change the narrative by just like adding a different ingredient that, you know, one doesn't expect. I mean, and in my case, it's usually personal memories or fiction. And I found them, I found that a very powerful tool to kind of like shake the foundations, especially when I do adopt these academic language or research-based practices. And I really appreciate you expanding on the idea of Asia. When I went to the Asian Museum,
Pacific Asian.
no, in San Francisco, Asian
yes.
Art Museum. It's Asian Art Museum, I think that's what it's called.
Is it?
They had a whole section on Iran, and I kind of like thought, oh, I never thought of Iran as part of Asia.
Oh, okay.
But it also kind of makes sense, I guess, continentally. So that's also, I feel like, what's powerful with like museums or projects where, you know, geographies get collapsed or borders get redefined, and then you're suddenly in bed with a strange fellow that you like didn't expect. And for me, that's also what Asian American, I don't know, nism, can you say that? Like brought about too, where cultures live much closer than they would have if they had remained on the continent.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's already an exercise in reimagining belonging and spaces. Like a space like LA, for instance, is so utopic in a way, you know.
Bubble.
The bubble. Yeah. And I'm fascinated by that. I actually do feel like I belong here more than anywhere else that I've lived in because of that mixture and transience and rubbing shoulders, I guess, with like different, small, different cultures. And I don't know how much of it I wish was like recognized by the state, because I feel like once things are recognized by the state, it gets destroyed in a way. So you're kind of held in this like precarious balance.
Yeah.
And everyone, I think. I feel like studying film, trying to be a filmmaker and artist, it was difficult, you know, in a Vietnamese family, and I'm sure you've heard stories like, you know, Asian parents want us to be doctors or lawyers, engineers. So, and I think I remember you mentioning one. I mean, like, I don't know how much your family knows what you do per se, but I think the support and love was there for my family, but I don't think they knew exactly what are you gonna do with film? Like, you're gonna make movies? What does that mean exactly? So I wish there was a little more support, but I think it's tough because my parents, coming from Vietnam, their vision of home or safety is just having a job, a roof over your head. So when I talk about my dreams and goals, it's like, really, are you sure you want to make movies? Like, don't you want a family? Don't you want a nice paying job? So I think there is a little disconnect between generations there. But
if it's so close, like I guess that's why I'm like saying it's like something like a phantom. You know, it's not, it's outside of like, you know, existing it like aesthetics, or it's exists outside of like, you know, recognizable form and language. I think it's outside of all of those things, and like, you know, kind of, because otherwise why wouldn't we be there, right?
sure.
Yeah, and so it is outside of all of those like different kinds of economies, like visual economies. And then like I feel like that's why I'm like saying it's about like it's kind of phantom like, you know? It's like a ghost. It's like kind of holding on to that, you know, feeling of like imagination. And for me, like, it's like about gesturing toward that place, that like kind of like the place of uncomfortability, of like, you know, of the unknown, of like greater imagination, you know, imagining some kind of like using what we have at hand, you know. Like, I want people to think for themselves what that could or would look like. Because, yeah, I don't think any one of us could, like, pin it down. If I had to describe some qualities about it, though, I would say that you know, she's I say she affectionately, she's transforming, she's transitioning, she's fragmentary. There are, you know, gaping voids where, you know, for the unknowable, and a lot of like unexpected interactions and transformations taking place in between all of these different fragments. And it is, you know, some that are recognizable, but then others that are unknowable or outside of cognition, you know, like affective fragments, you know, again, like the things that like kind of lie outside of like our language.
So their minds go to like, oh, it's my family culture, it's what my parents are like, it's what my grandparents are like. But that's like, there's just a tiny sliver.
Well, I mean, it's a good place to start.
It's a starting point, yeah. So there's like abjection, like distanciation. Like, I'm gonna distance away from that because that's the stuff at home. I don't want to, like, you know, it's not accepted in a broader society.
How do we talk about, like, okay, an Asian diasporic futurism, but then how do it both connects Asian Americans to a bigger futurism movement, but it also makes us less visible, because in a lot of like mainstream or independent films, it's not usually an Asian American. Typically, it's usually like just a generic Asian person, you know, and it's not really like identified whether they're from the United States or from an Asian country. And so while that does, like, again, connects us to a bigger identity of what Asian is, it does really invisibilize who Asian Americans are, and we're already invisible. Like, you know, why don't you, you know, the things we both get asked, why don't you have an accent? Where do you come from? So I think maybe there, you know, like, where does your heart lay? Like, you want to bring attention to Asian Americans as like a cultural entity, like we exist and we do have a culture, or do you want to like connect us to a larger Asian futurism movement? I think that you know, envisioning myself or people of my similar background as Asian American in the future is really exciting. Like, is there a future where we get to be our authentic Asian American selves, as, you know, being fully immersed in American culture, but not letting go or erasing our ties to our, you know, heritage. And so, I mean, I think we can include, like, yes, they're Asian American, but they're also Asian and they're also American. Like, that's a thing in itself. We shouldn't be pulled or forced to claim one over the other. I think it's a thing unto itself. Yeah, I mean, I think YouTube like has helped in the sense that there's that access there to actual Asian Americans who are speaking for themselves and putting it on a platform for themselves. So why hasn't the needle moved? I mean, that would be my question. And because probably just being there is not enough. It has to be there, like, in what way? It has, or it has to break into the mainstream in what way?
I just read an article the other day about my state, like how there are 50 dialects or something being spoken there, and there's a new 12-volume book is going to come out, and how a lot of the tribals were involved, the sort of indigenous people were involved in writing those books, which is great, like, because they have their own languages. But then they noted that, well, the last time the survey was done, there were 80 languages. So somehow, somewhere during the census, 30 have dropped out. And we don't really know why. But it's just, you know.
I was really moved by Rastafarian kind of worldviews. And this came out of my dissertation research, and of course, you know, the kind of Rastafarian worldview is a reimagination of what was depicted in the Bible, but with Afrocentric kind of narratives. And so that to me that's futurism. I mean, like, when we're saying to ourselves that, look, this history doesn't speak to us, it's an assertion of a different feeling. That feeling can turn into questioning, and it could eventually, I think, turn into a reimagination of storytelling about the past that is then pointing us in a different direction, down a different path about the future.
Like, is this counter to futurism? But I find myself trapped in cycles of returns, always, and maybe that's my obsession with the past, but I feel like, not just with my art practice, you know, looking back at these histories, but also my own way of life, where I'm always kind of looking back to a different time and a different practice, and like wanting to bring that back, you know, like a slower pace of living, for instance, with the bike or walking. So I would love for things to be more silent, that there's less of all these like bombardments of like images and sounds and videos and content constantly being moved around. I start to have these moments where I just didn't want to talk, when I'm in a group of people, and then start hearing voices or projecting my own voices into the landscape, and kind of half expecting the people around me to hear it without me having to say it. So maybe that's the next step, telepathy. Or like you don't have to make any sound from your voice, you can just like communicate through silence.
Yeah, like the I don't know if you've heard the term like epistemological privilege. Have you heard that one before?
No, tell me what that is.
You know what epistemologies are? Yeah. So like basically meaning, knowledge, right? But like access to different types of knowledges.
Oh.
Right? Not just from like there is the perspective of like, you're very book smart, right? And you have a lot of access to knowledge from specifically the the United States, the USA lens. But if you have never learned another system of knowledge or wisdom outside of that, you don't really have epistemological privilege.
Right.
Same thing with, I think, generations before us, right? They, I think, had access to a very small breadth and depth of knowledge. And so being able to think about these things is a privilege. Like the fact that I'm able to sit with you here today and talk about this stuff is a privilege, right? And it is an epistemological privilege, is a knowledge privilege, because we have access, we have been able to think with and talk to and experience the minds of so many people, you as an artist, myself as a teacher, that we have access to all these different types of knowledge bases and wisdom and wisdoms. But that's not everybody else's privilege out there. And
I think I have a relationship to technology that manifests in pretty much everything I do. And that, it's interesting. I think a lot of my fascination with futurity in sonic forms actually come from street musicians in Taiwan. Like I spent a ton of time like studying street musicians, ways in which they practice. Like they would like set up an amplifier and like put a generator. Like they could practice anywhere, they could play anywhere because they don't have a venue to play. So like they'll set up a generator, and then they'll do pickup shows in the park, and then like they'll have like amazing sound system like with karaoke vocals and like concert hall reverberation. So then they could feel like they're like these like glamorous stars while singing in a park.
A friend asked me about kaidon lessons and how that just spurred this like whole thing where I realized my mind is colonized. I can't break free from this without like, or I didn't even realize that fact.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the first step to decolonizing my mind. But it's very difficult because it's totally entrenched in colonization.
Right.
And as is like everyone and everything around me, I think, in general. What happened was some time ago, my friend, one of my best friends from Korea who now resides in LA, she was asking me like, oh, like I want to sign my daughter up for kaegam lessons, and kaegam, the traditional 12-string Korean instrument, sort of like the violin of the traditional music family in Korea. It's the most popular, and her daughter is maybe like, back then she was like early elementary, and I know her daughter pretty well too, and I just said to her like, why would you, like don't sign her up for kaegam lessons, just sign her up for piano, like for foundational things, because it's unless they show like a particular talent for music or anything, I would say like you don't need to sign her up for lessons at all, really. Just like take her to shows and like expose her to music and culture. But she was really like set on signing her up for kaegam lessons, and I was like, well, you should just sign her up for piano because that's like the foundation. And then I thought, why is piano the foundation? it's seen as something like it's a very institutional thing, right? And you want to. I don't think she wants her kid to take lessons just because she loves the arts. It's true, but it's not. It's because she wants her to get ahead. That's why she signs up for like archery or whatever. Like things. So on her college application, she can say like, I was on the archery team and I play the kayak and whatever. Things like that to make her stand out. So yeah, I guess for standing out, it's good. But sorry, I'm going into. Okay, so what I want to say is I got there and I thought, why did I say that? And I believe that, that it's better for her to take piano lessons. But I realized, my mind is still very much colonized. I can't break free from that mindset where something like the kayagam or traditional folk music like that could be as valuable in education and also just the fact that it has to have value in a way where it gets you ahead in the world. That's also very I just realized my mind is just colonized all around. Yeah, and I was very surprised. I was very sad